Today's gospel reading comes from the 16th chapter of Matthew. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, but others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven." All thanks and praise be to God for his word, for the inspiration it brings to us as it binds us together as the community of faith, the church. Amen. This morning, I want to start by telling you the process of how you can become a Presbyterian minister. So if that's been a secret that you've been keeping, take notes. Here it comes. First, you have to be Presbyterian. Then when you graduate from college and you decide that's what you want to do, you have to go to theological seminary, and you have to go to one that's approved by our denomination. It's not necessarily a Presbyterian school, but you've got to go to one that the denomination says it's okay to go to. And if that's your intention, you have to tell the session at your Presbyterian church that these are your plans, and you go before the session, and they're usually thrilled they got somebody going into ministry, and they vote to endorse you to the presbytery, which is the larger regional body. Then you contact the presbytery, and they assign you to the committee on the preparation of for ministry. And that's a standing committee, and you got to go meet with these people. And there's anywhere from 10 to 20 of them on a committee, depending on how big the presbytery is. And they'll call you in for your initial meeting, and they'll interview you, and they'll ask you about why do you feel you want to go into ministry, and you share with them, and they share with you. And if everything is in order and everything is going well, they vote to make you what is called an inquirer. And if you're an inquirer, you have to be an inquirer for 1 year. That means being an inquirer means that you're still inquiring into whether or not you really do feel the call to ministry. Then, after that year of inquiry, usually in your second year of seminary, you go before the committee again, and you say, "I've been an inquirer for a year, and I really do feel strongly that God is calling me to the ministry of the Word and Sacrament in the Presbyterian Church." And that's when the first meeting you have with them, they're kind of nice and welcomingly and friendly, and then the second time you meet with them, they're getting a little tougher now because you want to go further into the process. And so they start asking you some tough questions about your sense of call and how you know Jesus is calling you to the ministry and what you consider the ministry to be. And you get into some deeper conversation than you did the year before. And if everything is in order and it goes well, they make you a candidate, and you got to be a candidate for 2 years. That pretty much takes you to the end of your seminary career. And in your senior year in seminary, actually the end of your second year in seminary is 1, and then there's 4 more at the beginning of your senior year. You got to take 5 ordination exams. First, you've got to take Bible content. It's like a Bible trivia quiz. You got to know where everything is. And it's a tough Trivial Pursuit game, let me tell you. They try to trip you up. Then you have to take the biblical theology exam, and you've got to be able to articulate either in Greek or in Hebrew. That's fun. You also have to take the written worship exam. Do you understand Presbyterian worship? You have to take the polity exam, which is, do you understand Presbyterian governance? And finally, you have to take the theology exam, which can be a toughie. And you got to pass all those exams while you're in your senior year in seminary. Then if you pass those written exams, well, you have to write a statement of faith. And you have to respond to questions that are sent to you by that committee that's had oversight of you now for 3 years. And you got to bring all those papers together, and you got to get them to the committee, and then you got to come and you got to meet with the committee again. Now, the first time you met with them, they were nice and friendly, and you had a good time, and they made you feel good about yourself. The second time, they got a little tougher. They really challenged you. And this third time, the knives come out. And boy, you have to go through a tough oral examination. And you feel like you're sitting in front of the Jerusalem Council. I mean, they're on you. And boy, I tell you, it's anxiety producing. And they always tell you before you go in, now just remember, we're your friends, we're supporting you, we love you, we care about you. They say that right ahead of time. I swear to God, they're lying to me. Well, if you get through the orals and they say everything is good and you have a call, you have a congregation that says that we want to have you be our minister, the next step is you go before the entire presbytery. You present your statement of faith, and this is 100 or more people from all over that region, people you don't know and never met, and you give your statement of faith, and they open the floor for questions from anybody on anything. Whew, that's a tough one. And if you survive that, you're in. So, now, that's the process. Let me tell you how it played out for me. My senior year, I took all the ordination exams, and they give you have to take all the exams in 1 week. And I flunked one. I flunked theology. And that was in the fall, and I had to go back in February and retake it. So I retook it, and I passed. Thank goodness. And so I then went before I was scheduled to go before the committee. My statement of faith was written. All the questions that I had to answer were answered, and I had all that paper together and sent it to the chairman of the committee. Then they call you up and tell you when your oral exam is going to take place. And this was the Presbytery of Hudson River in New York, and I was at Princeton. And they gave me the date and the time to show up at the meeting. Smack dab in the middle of finals week of my senior year. I was on no sleep. I had to drive into New York City. I got to the parking lot to start my car. It wouldn't start. I had to rush back to the dorm, beg a friend to let me borrow his car, jumped in this little thing, I don't know what it was hard to drive, and had to drive into New York City. There was a heat wave going on. I was in a suit, and there was no air conditioning in this guy's car. So I showed up. I was already a mess upon arrival. And I sat down with the committee, and the chairman said, "Jeff, the committee didn't get your papers." And I said, "I sent them to you." And he said, "Well, I got them, but the committee didn't get them." I said, "I was supposed to do that? I can't afford to send all that paper to 20 people." "Well, I suppose we'll have to operate without the papers." So then you wait for the big question. But before the big question, somebody's going to ask you the big question, the tough one, the one that's going to really test you. Before that, they give you some warm-up questions. So the warm-up question came, "Jeff, tell us why we go to worship on Sunday." I said, "Because in Scripture it's very clear we go to celebrate our Creator and the blessing of the creation and our life in it. I thought. And I answered that question. I thought, oh, that was pretty good. And the chairman goes, no, Jeff, the day. Why do we worship on that particular day? And I went, I was drawing a blank, and I said, it's the first day of the week. Seems like a really good way to start out your week, doesn't it? And someone else said to me, don't you think it has something to do with the resurrection on the first day of the week? Oh, yeah, that too. And then the chairman said, Jeff, would you step out of the room for a moment? I thought, man, I didn't muff the big question. I muffed the question leading up to the big question. And I went out of the room, and I want to show you something. There is a movie that I remember from my college days in 1973, and the name of the movie was The Paper Chase. And it's the story of a young man going through Harvard Law. And I want to show you the scene that was running through my head as I stepped outside that committee room.
Constitutional contracts, marriage contracts, historical contracts, French contracts, African tribal contracts, religious contracts. Now, Mr. Hart, can you relate our next case to the summary we've been building?
Thank you, I prefer to pass.
What did you say?
Well, I have nothing relevant to say concerning the case. However, when I have something relevant to say, I shall raise my hand.
Mr. Hart, would you step down here?
Excuse me.
Mr. Hart, here's a dime. Call your mother. Tell her there's serious doubt about your becoming a lawyer.
It was like they put a dime in my hand before I left the room. By the way, I looked just like that guy. The hair, the mustache, exactly like it. Jesus asked Peter the big question. But who do you say that I am? And Peter piped right up. You're the Messiah. You are the Son of the living God. You know those bright students? Can you hear the other disciples? That know-it-all. He drives me crazy sometimes. He got the answer right. So there was a young minister on that committee who had been at a seminary just for a couple of years, and I knew him personally. He had been a student at Princeton, upperclassman, and we were friends, and he liked me and I liked him. And he was on that committee, and when they asked me to leave the room, he said to the rest of the committee, you know, something's off. This isn't the Jeff I know. Let me go out there and talk to him and see what's going on. So he came out. And he said, Jeff, the committee's feeling like they're talking to a completely different person than who we've known throughout these 3 years, and we're just wondering what's going on. And I broke down and wept right there in front of him. And I told him my tale of woes. I'm in the middle of finals week. I had no sleep for 2 days. My car broke down. I had to drive some other guy's car, no air conditioning. I'm a mess. I'm just a mess. And he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, let me go back in. And he went back in. He came back out. And he said, we discussed it. The committee made a decision. We're going to give you another shot at this a month from now when things are all settled in your life. And I just said, oh. Because that dime was in my hand, and I was going to have to call Mom and tell her I wasn't going to be a minister after all. So I got back to my dorm, and my roommate was there. He also, by the way, was examined by another presbytery the same day, and I walked in, and the first thing he said to me was, "So how'd you do?" I went through with flying colors. And I felt like those disciples after Peter gave the right answer. But you know, we're all human. We're all going to get the wrong answer at some time or another. Even Peter, after giving that brilliant answer, gave the wrong one just a couple minutes later. Jesus said, after Peter's brilliant answer, "The Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected." And Peter shouted, "God forbid it, Lord, this must never happen to you." And Jesus responded to Peter by saying, "Get behind me, Satan." I bet some of those disciples smiled at that moment. There's a theory, educational theory, called the Transformative Learning Theory. And it has 3 dimensions, and they go like this. In the learning process, we as people go through, in order to learn, we go through a change in understanding ourselves. That's the first step. The second step is that going through that change of understanding ourselves, we wind up revising our belief system according to our new life context. And finally, as a result of that, we change our lifestyle. That's called the Transformative Learning Theory. Let's take a look at it for a minute. Let's think about Peter. You have to go through a disorienting dilemma. Well, Jesus, the Son of God, saying, "Get thee behind me, Satan," is pretty disorienting, isn't it? Causes you to go into self-examination. There's a sense of alienation now. You are not tracking the way you normally do. You haven't given the right answer. You're out of sync, not only with yourself, but with your peers all around you. And you relate your discontent to others. But then there's an explaining of the options of a new behavior. And as you begin to understand more deeply what that new behavior might be, you begin to build confidence in ways that you never thought of before. Then you plan a course of action. Then you gain knowledge to implement those plans. And then you begin experimenting with the new being that you're becoming, and you reintegrate into the community. This is the process that Peter actually went through in that crisis. He was on top of his world when he gave that right answer to Jesus. We all want to give Jesus the right answer. And he did it. And not just a few minutes later, he gave the completely wrong answer. And it created a crisis in his life. Not only a crisis in his life, but a potential crisis long term, because Jesus had already said, "You are Peter, you're the rock upon which I will build my church." And now you just gave the wrong answer. What kind of church is that going to be if you can't get this right? So you can imagine the struggle. And it wasn't the only wrong answer Peter would give. It was bad enough to have Christ say, "Get behind me, Satan," and looking at you. But then you go from there to the point of crucifixion, and you deny him 3 times publicly. Boy, that's the wrong answer too. He had answered a big question right. And then he turned around and got a whole bunch of things wrong. And this was the guy Jesus was building his church on. He had to go from a leader of high esteem to a broken disciple who didn't know where to turn. But you know what? It's exactly what was required for him to be that so-called rock that would build the church. Without those moments, without being up on high and coming crashing down, without those moments, this church upon which Jesus said he would build on Peter could not have gone forward. It could not have gone forward. Because you see, you can't be the church by being a room full or a church full or a world full of the brightest students who always get the right answer. That's not who we are. And God knows it. And God knows who he's gathering. God knows who he's building the church upon. And it's flawed human beings. Flawed human beings who know what it is to be taken into the hands of a graceful and forgiving God and lifted up after we have broken ourselves down once again. You know, throughout my career, I've had to serve on presbytery committees, some tough ones. In one committee, the Committee on Ministry, is the traffic cop committee of the presbytery. I've been on that and I'm on it again, where you have to do ecclesiastical stuff you just hate to do. You just hate it. More than once, I've had to oversee a commission that was dealing with a church that was leaving the congregation, and we had to deal with property issues and who was going to keep the property and all the backbiting and stuff that goes with a process like that, and I hated it. I've been just like this with another minister who screwed up big time and had to ask him, "What were you thinking?" And the toughest part being, not that he screwed up, but that he couldn't own it. And he refused to own it, even in a conversation where we both knew what he did and why he did it. I hate that stuff. And you can't be involved in that stuff unless you know. You could be on the other side of the desk because you're human. And there, but by the grace of God, goes any of us in the church. You see, we have to remind ourselves, you know what the church is? And put this phrase in your head. The church is a collection of pre-resurrection Peters. Got that? The church is a collection of pre-resurrection Peters that completely depend upon the resurrection to pull them out of the mess they've gotten into. Because the church is about God's vision, not ours. And we forget that sometimes. But that passage from the book of Acts is so powerful. After Peter went through everything he did, and then they started that church, and the day of Pentecost came, and then the explanation about the first gathering of the faithful. Awe came upon everyone. They were together, and they had all things in common. That's us. Today we have our annual meeting. We look at all the stuff we've done in the past year, and we vision forward for the next. And there's a lot of reports, there's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of things that people say that they've done on behalf of this committee or that committee. But the most important thing to remember today, as we launch as Covenant Presbyterian Church in 2016, is that we are a gathering of pre-resurrection Peters. And thank God for his grace. Amen.